questions we can in these 17 minutes.
My question is, has the United States found an alternative to military conflict? You said that war was an extension of diplomacy by other means.
Somebody else said that, but you're absolutely, yes.
Financial crisis is an extension of diplomacy by other means. So what America is doing, having suffered financial crisis, is now exporting it to Russia.
Whoa. I don't know. It would be very nice to. The President of the United States today is one of several people I perceive to be one who would earnestly like to replace battles by economic sanctions. It would be much nicer. Economic sanctions are bad, but they're better than armies shooting at each other. So my perception was that in the past, economic sanctions have been frustratingly unhelpful. In Iran, I think they have been helpful. They have brought pressure, and part of it has been because of a very, very broad agreement to impose these sanctions. And in some sense, that's a good thing for world government, for a better world order. I am deeply involved. I've become deeply involved in the problems of Russia and Ukraine today because I think the Ukrainian constitution is horribly flawed for a country that has had all kinds of difficulties to saddle them with a vast, excessively centralized regime for all the reasons that it's feeble because it's completely centralized. So I understand why Ukraine is having difficulties, and I understand, but I don't understand. I read in the newspapers that our pressure on Russia has had some effect, but our economic pressure, if so, as I said, that's much better than our shooting at each other. Much better. On the other hand, I'm skeptical because I'm not sure that sanctions have that kind of power on elites.
David.
Okay. My question is, Professor, you just mentioned Thucydides at the beginning of your speech, and there is a word named Thucydides trap, which means a new superpower will always challenge current superpower violently, just as Deutsche Empire against British Empire, Soviet Union against America. My question is that, do you think the new rising superpower China will face the same problem as Deutsche Empire and the Soviet Union? Because now China and America are facing a really tough time. Yeah, in South China Sea.
This is a great. There's a lot about non-state Islamic terrorism, Islamic extremism in the newspapers in the last decade, certainly in America, and I think here also. When non-state actors are the worst problem you can think of, you are in a golden age. This is a very, very good thing. The real thing to fear is great power military rivalries in the 21st century. And yes, there's an obvious question: will there be a great power military rivalry between the United States and the People's Republic of China? And I'll say my thoughts on it. But my first thought is there is no more important question for the 21st century. And I'll say I think there are some things to hope for in both. Chinese culture is deeply, both Chinese culture and American culture have political cultures in both countries have in some ways a tradition of being suspicious of imperialism. The American was originated in colonial times. The Chinese from the unhappy end of the Tang Dynasty, where China was very successful in conquering other countries, and then suddenly the armies came back and trashed the capital. So, oh, maybe it's not such a great thing to conquer other countries. So there's some reason to hope that from deep traditions of both of our countries that we can all live together. The equilibrium, I'm an American, so let me just say there was one equilibrium that some of our presidents have recently tried to articulate, which is we're going to spend as much as all on defense, as much as all the other countries in the world combined. So if you spend more, we'll just spend more. And by the I think there's good hope that we will live a long. If we live a long time, we will still never see a war. Another war. There was a war when I was a baby between America and China. But I hope we will live a long. I think there's reason to hope we can live a long time and never see a war between our countries. What's much more likely, on the downside that I fear, is both of our countries, China and America, start building extremely dangerous weapons at large expense because the other country is doing it. And that's that. And then we have a risk of a much smaller probability risk. I hope to avoid even that. The equilibrium is no. Americans will spend a vast amount. The Chinese won't. They'll spend some. Okay. I would argue that the United States cannot hope for that equilibrium unless the United States demonstrates to the world that military. It wouldn't be such a bad thing. Since I'm an American, obviously, I think this isn't so bad. But I should recognize as a game theorist, I should look at it from everybody's perspective, and it's not quite. But on the other hand, it would be better to toss a coin and say, which your country that's armed to the teeth, or my country, but at most one country should be armed to the teeth. That's better than having two countries armed to the teeth. So let's toss a coin, and if you win the coin toss, that would be a much better solution. So we won the coin toss, but no, it's not stable unless we accept more than anybody else constraints of international law. And the invasion of Iraq was just blowing that away. The American invasion of Iraq that did not have broad multinational support. The United States should say, we're going to be the peacekeepers until we have a bunch of military industrial complex that likes us taxing our people to waste money on weapons. And somehow it works for us politically. The rest of you don't have to spend it. But if you begin to think that we're going to use that to start doing things that harm the interests of other countries and that scare other countries, then you're going to start saying, I wish there was, like the old Soviet Union days, another superpower to counter them. And I think after 2003, that a lot of people rightly could have thought that, and that was dangerous. So either we have to stop pushing it so hard ourselves, or if we're going to be exercising one superpower world, it has to be that superpower is much more restrained. It's okay for the Chinese to have some adventures if they're the weaker one, but the Americans must be the most constrained by broadly accepted international principles.
Let's take some more questions, couple more questions. We had one over there, lady over there.
Hi, I'm Christy. I'd like to ask, I remember watching a documentary called The Trap, and have you heard of it?
No.
Basically, it points to game theories
Yes.
and saying that it's a residue or it's a legacy of the Cold War mentality. And I wonder if you agree with that, and also given we're interested in game theories, I wonder if there's a danger posed by game theory theoretical calculations when applied to all sorts of public life and public policy making, and also international relations.
So game theory it takes mathematical models. It's a mathematical technique, but we're looking at the structure of people's incentives and what their more broader economics are. Their endowment determines what their options are and what they want, and then they're in conflict. They have different interests, and it tries to predict what will happen. Equilibrium is our basic solution concept. We've defined a game which describes the structure of what people want and what their strategic options are, and then what we predict they'll do is going to satisfy the conditions we call equilibrium. If there's only one equilibrium, so I'm a professor of economics, and some of you are getting degrees in economics, but I'm going to be getting advanced degrees in economics, and if you get an advanced degree in economics, you'll have a vested interest in the proposition that the economic structure of a situation, which is in some circumstances called a game, that the economic structure of the situation determines what happens. That's called economic determinism, and if you're a card-carrying economist, then maybe you have a vested interest in the proposition that the economic structure matters. When there are multiple equilibria, that's saying, no, I'm sorry, the economic structure doesn't determine everything. Certain kinds of cultural perceptions within, if broadly perceived, can make a huge difference in behavior because there are different perceptions, any one of which could be rational. And Schelling was the guy who taught us to appreciate that and to get back from our vested interests in economic determinism and admit that multiple equilibria are important. I think, for example, the tragedy of 1914, the tragedy of the coming of the First World War, looks to me like a multiple equilibrium phenomenon compared to today, 100 years later. You said, the Europeans can all live together, no problem, we don't have to. But if every European country is assuming that the other European countries are going to prepare to attack it someday soon, then all the European countries need to arm themselves, and every now and then there'll be situations where countries might think, if the war is going to come inevitably, then it'd be better for me if I start it now. Not that it's better to have, and of course, of the great powers that started World War I, in some sense, all of them lost, and at least several of them, on both sides, the Austrian Empire, the Russian Empire, the ruling class was destroyed, so many powerful agents were involved, had the worst possible outcome on both sides. Why were they so stupid? And one possibility to me is that they're just, well, one possibility is they're stupid, but economists say, and there are behavioral economists who want to study that kind of thing, but I would say, no, it's multiple equilibria, and yes, calling it a trap becomes particularly tragic if there was another trap, if there was a good equilibrium, so a trap is a bad equilibrium. That no one of us can get out of. We all need to persuade ourselves that we're going to all behave differently, and if nobody is going to behave differently, then I would be a fool to change too. And yes, so the question of America, a trap between America and China, where we come. I guess I'm saying I think there's a good equilibrium in which America and China do not have a military rivalry in this century, but we're going to have to think very carefully about the strategic possibilities, because there really is a possibility of such a bad equilibrium where American perceptions of Chinese power, of how Chinese power is exercised, and Chinese perceptions of how American power is exercised, lead both countries to scare each other into doing things that reinforce each other's perceptions and make for a very dangerous world. We want to make game models of it. No game model should be taken seriously by itself. There should be a dialogue, like in Thucydides' Peloponnesian War. One guy says, here's what we do because here's the game models. He says, no, wait a minute. Using the same language, I can make some, but changing the assumptions, because anything we do, whether it's in game theory or any other description, it's a simplification of the vastly complicated reality we live on. Anyway, okay. I think the language of multiple equilibria is an appropriate language for understanding the trap, and that there's nothing more important we can talk about.
We'll take one final question. Okay, go ahead.
I feel like to me the most obvious application of strategic interaction today is climate change negotiation.
Yes.
So do you think there's a way we could reach a good equilibrium?
I just read Nordhaus. Nordhaus Climate Casino is a very nice book. That's the only. I've read a couple of things else. I think this is magnificent. I think he's an economist on his book, The Climate Casino, I trust his description of the science, which is, some things are very clear, and some things, but there's been a lot of talk about his models of economic cost. To me, that book, I don't know what he's written in other articles, but in this book, he says, there might be a high cost, there might not be a high cost to increasing carbon dioxide. One of the things he discusses is that it's only been like a decade ago that scientists realized that increasing CO2 in the atmosphere is also changing the chemistry of the ocean with more carbonic acid in the water, which may have profound implications, or might not have profound, they have profound implications, some which may be profoundly adverse to us, or maybe not. So there's a huge uncertainty. To me, what hasn't been in this debate, that needs to be importantly said, is, in some sense, his solution. So he says, where there's risk, he can't tell you that it'll be hugely costly to future history, but it's, there are things we could do to mitigate. And the things to do to mitigate, this is economics professor talking, all economic, a tax on burning carbon. You can do it with cap and trade if it's equivalent to a tax, but it's the simplest way to describe it is a tax. He says, based on his calculations, that our models suggest a tax in which the United States, I've forgotten, but I think the United States, the total revenue of the carbon tax would be about 2% of American GDP over the next generation. I think those numbers. I may be wrong, maybe it's 4%. It's either 2 or 4%. I don't know what it would be in Britain, but let's say, he says it's really important that it be a global tax. It has to be something we all agree about. If there are exceptions, those parts of the world are going to start burning more carbon to produce products that are carbon intensive and that are energy intensive, and it's not going to work because we're talking about a global problem. By the way, I think the development of strong states means that a huge number of externalities that exist on the level of a few hundred kilometers, states now can handle them. As pollution in regions of the ocean that might be handleable by property rights, those like loss of fisheries might be handleable by nations asserting property rights over the oceans. this is a global externality, and it's just when you think about the chemistry of it. If carbon dioxide is adversely changing the climate in a slow but adverse way, possibly if there's a chance of that, since it doesn't harm us at all locally, no nation has incentive to do it, but we can perform it. Now, I want to argue what hasn't been in the debate is that the remedies are essentially free. Why? Because 2 or 4% of America, a new tax that raises 2 or 4% of GDP for every country, that's less than what governments are already spending. So it's going to be, what you're going to learn, what you learn in your economics classes is how to analyze the adverse impact of taxes. They distort trade. And now, if carbon truly is an externality, which we think is a positive probability event, then there is an externality, and then therefore making people do something that looks for other reasons to be more costly, but it reduces the carbon impact, actually is socially less costly, so it's a good thing to do. But maybe it's not. Maybe actually the carbon doesn't matter. However, what's the loss? The loss is we're going to have more taxes on carbon, but less taxes on something else, because we're not increasing taxes. Most countries are taxing between 20 and 50% of GDP. 2 to 5% of GDP just means the carbon tax is going to eliminate some other taxes, it's going to substitute for some other taxes, get rid of the most distorting other tax, and your GDP is not going to change. So why? But it's not. So now let's do it, guys. I mean, unless you think there's a zero chance that carbon matters, then we should do it. It's not going to. It's unlikely because what doesn't affect GDP in aggregate does affect individuals' wealth in aggregate. And I think we need to start economics perhaps by recognizing people are constantly making investments. The wealth of our species that's dominating the world begins with people feel safe making investments. Society has to be organized so people feel safe making investments. But that means, and the safety, the protection is presided over by our political leaders. And the machinery, those political leaders rely on broad acceptance that they have power, broad recognition of it. And one of the ways we can get that system, that mechanism to actually protect property rights is if we say that any leader who violates well-understood property rights is not going to be recognized as a leader anymore. We'll go to the next one on the list. So we developed in every society strong ways to pressure people who seem to have expropriated property rights. Somebody who pushes for a new carbon tax is reducing the value of investments that people have made in coal mines or in coal-fired technology. There are all kinds of investments that people have made under the assumption that this is how the economy works. And when you change it, it looks like you're expropriating, and all of our political systems are set up to resist that. And that, I think, is something that also should be part of economics and political science, to try to understand that.
I want to stop you. We're out of time.
We're out of time, we are.
I want to say that, it's really great to see so many non-economist Warwick students here. I had to keep on stopping you. You must come back. Because I hope the non-economists in particular got something out of this. If you did, raise your hand, I'm bringing him back. Okay, I'm going to make sure he comes back, hopefully next academic year, to tell us more. A big thank you.